Hey everyone, and welcome back. Now today I want to do something a little bit different. I've done a couple of these videos in the past, but I want to do a little bit of like a beginner's guide intro to crypto type of thing. Just in case, if you're like me, you probably have people who are not super familiar into crypto, and they might have some questions or things that they want to know a little bit more about. Particularly, I would imagine as this bull run kind of continues, there's going to be more and more people who are looking to kind of get some guidance on that. So I want to create this video both for your own knowledge, in case you're interested to kind of learn more of the fine details about kind of how things work, but also if you have people who are kind of curious and looking for kind of some guidance there, you can also direct them here as well. So in this next video, I'm essentially already assuming that you know kind of the basics of blockchain and how blockchain works generally. If you don't, there should be kind of a tag somewhere up here in one of the corners of the video where it'll actually link you to that video. I would probably recommend that you have a general understanding of blockchain before we go into kind of learning more about crypto generally. So anyway, that's kind of my disclaimer there. But going on, I want to talk a little bit about essentially what you need to know about crypto and just kind of breaking down the space overall. So let's go on ahead and dive right in. So I'm actually going to end up removing my picture just because we are going to get to some points where my picture is going to be covering stuff up. So as we get there, I'll remove my picture, but no, I'm still here. You'll just have to listen to the sound of my voice, I guess. So moving on. So we're going to start looking at cryptocurrency, and then we're going to kind of move down the line. Cryptocurrency is kind of where things start after understanding and kind of knowing what a blockchain is, right? And so cryptocurrency is kind of the thing on the blockchain or the ledger itself, and it is like the unit of account, right? So if the blockchain is the ledger itself, cryptocurrency is the dollars that we're using to kind of keep track of people's value within that ledger. And so that's kind of what we're seeing here is it's a medium exchange where individual coin ownership records are stored in a ledger. Now, essentially there's a couple different things that it does. The first is it secures transaction records. It controls the creation of additional coins. It can verify the transfer of coin ownership. And also, basically, participants receive a copy of this ledger as part of things being like a decentralized ledger. You could have a cryptocurrency on a centralized blockchain and things work still kind of similarly, but this kind of is against what most crypto projects do. There are some kind of internally developed private blockchains, but most public blockchains, all participants are able to receive a copy of the ledger. Also, the ledger is compared with other ledgers for accuracy because this is essentially how, like if I say I have 100 coins and you say I have 10, like who's right? We're going to be comparing it to kind of the overall wider public ledger, and that's how we essentially decide who's right. So in crypto, there are kind of two main theories, I guess you could say, of how crypto is mined and how it's computed, all that type of stuff. And so the first is proof of work, the second is proof of stake. As we continue to get a little bit more complex, either there's like delegated proof of stake, there's proof of burn, there's proof of useful work. There's a lot of different types of things going on here, but we're going to start with the basics and essentially kind of start with proof of work and proof of stake because those are the two that started it all. So proof of work is obviously the one that started, and then proof of stake was kind of like the next novel invention from there. So proof of work is essentially like you're trying to solve a complicated math problem, and proving that you found an answer to that math problem is essentially how you prove that you were like spending work to like solve the problem. Obviously pretty straightforward, right? I mean, if you come back with an answer, you obviously did the work to figure it out. And so if you solve the cryptographic puzzle, you receive a block reward, and that's essentially the incentive for doing so. Now, with both, the kind of key difference between proof of stake and proof of work is a couple different things. First off, proof of stake is a little bit more efficient because proof of work kind of depends on you essentially burning energy to figure out the answers to these problems. And these problems aren't necessarily like useful, right? Like they're just here basically to make things hard. They're not here to really achieve anything other than just making things hard. Now, the way that you essentially would attack a proof of work blockchain, hackers would essentially need to have a computer more powerful than 51% of the network to essentially add a malicious block where they can change balances or change transactions or whatever, things like that. And so that's essentially like what we call a 51% attack. And that is essentially how attackers or hackers would need to do that. Obviously, with something at the scale of Bitcoin, it would be really, really, really hard to do something like that. But the theory here is that it could be possible because the holders and the miners are loosely aligned, but they're not like super strongly aligned, right? And so this is kind of where we got into like the next novel kind of innovation here, which is proof of stake. Now, proof of stake is essentially like your validating capacity depends on your stake in the network. So if you own 1% of the total supply of the network, you would have 1% say in terms of like how things are operated and all that type of stuff, right? So instead, they don't actually receive like a block reward, but they collect transaction fees of like things going, like interacting and stuff through the chain as their reward. Now here, this third part is kind of really the like key difference that like makes proof of stake better. You could also argue that like not burning energy for like somewhat useless reasons could also be like a benefit here, but realistically the main benefit is the 51% attack, because for the 51% attack, essentially the hacker would need to own 51% of all the cryptocurrency on the network, which is not only practically impossible in like a thriving network, but it also is like highly against their own motivation, right? If let's say we have a 50, or let's just say we have $1 trillion network, and this hacker who's trying to conduct this 51% attack, I mean, they would have to have 51% of that, right? So that would be $510 billion. Now, obviously, if they conduct a 51% attack on their own network, basically everybody else is going to flee it, and it's essentially going to kill the network. Why would they want to kill the value of their own investment? It just makes no sense, right? And so this piece right here is basically like the key part as to why people think proof of stake is potentially like a better option than proof of work. I still think both kind of have their own uses and their own value, but proof of stake has kind of been seen as like a better alternative purely kind of for this option. Now, moving on, I want to talk a little bit about coins versus tokens, because a lot of people, I think, kind of use them interchangeably and they don't understand the difference between them, right? And so a coin is like the actual payment of a cryptocurrency itself. So if you think about like Ethereum, you can't like load your Ethereum wallet up with USDT and go like just use the network, right? Like that's not how that works. You have to have Ethereum in your wallet to pay the gas fees to like interact on the network. So that's essentially like the key purpose of a coin, is it is like the payment currency of that overall network. Tokens are not that. They're essentially a feature built on top of the base layer. They're also often cheaper than the cryptocurrency in like terms of market cap, because it's kind of an addition onto the larger piece rather than the actual piece itself, right? Like if you were to think about like Facebook is the social network. It is the kind of foundation that everything is built on. And if we go back to some of the like, OG Facebook days, we could think about like Facebook games, right? Farmville is something built on Facebook. It would be kind of ridiculous to ever assume that Farmville would be more valuable than Facebook, because it's a feature built on top of the base layer. Tokens are kind of a similar comparison to that. Now, sometimes swapping USD to tokens can require many steps because of this. There are a lot more tokens listed directly on centralized exchanges nowadays, so it does make it a little bit easier. But if you were to try and go trade for some obscure token, you're likely going to essentially have to trade from USDC to whatever that base coin is on the network, and then take that base coin and then trade it to that token, because that is essentially like the currency of that network. So that's usually how it works. It can be a little bit more difficult there. Swaps and exchanges can take place on a DEX or a centralized exchange. It looks like you cut off a little bit over here, but yeah, I mean, it can happen either or. Generally, the smaller things are listed on DEXs, the larger things are listed on centralized exchanges. Since centralized exchanges kind of do everything off chain, they need to be able to float kind of a lot of the liquidity for these trades. And so they don't really usually bother with a lot of these smaller coins. They only list the bigger coins. And that's why usually these bigger coins get such a boost when they're listed on exchanges, is because not only do exchanges need to buy them, but then also when they essentially get it listed on an exchange, there's a massive pot of liquidity now added to that. And so that's kind of what we can see there. We can essentially think about like coins versus like tokens in kind of this interesting example, right? So if we were to think about arcade coins, it's really, really unlikely that you could swap arcade coins directly for British pounds, unless like that arcade also happens to be in Great Britain. Then potentially you could swap for those coins directly for pounds. But usually, if you have arcade coins and you're based in the US, you're going to have to go to that arcade, swap your arcade coins into dollars, and then you're going to need to go take your dollars, go to a currency exchanger, and then swap your dollars for pounds. You couldn't really go from here to there unless there was some sort of some sort of marketplace that was, or there was like a market made particularly for these arcade coins swapping directly to British pounds. But again, you generally would need a market maker for that, and they're not going to waste their time unless there's a huge amount of volume needing to be done, which is kind of how you could think about centralized exchanges in this role. Now, next I want to take a look at what is a smart contract. Smart contracts are essentially they're just programs stored on the blockchain. So that's what allows things to do stuff, basically. They run when predetermined conditions are met. So basically, if something happens, it does this, and that's why it's a smart contract. It just sits there and basically waits for that thing to happen. And this is what enables trustless transactions to occur without the involvement of a third party, just because it's there and it does whatever it's supposed to when that thing is met. So it's written into the blockchain and executed on the blockchain as a service or application. Now, this is not necessarily totally true. Smart contracts are usually written like on an AWS server or something like that. There are projects, actually I think ICP is probably the only one that I'm at least aware of, where you actually write the code onto the blockchain and it's all hosted on chain. A lot of these other chains really only deal with the transaction itself, and a lot of the smart contracts and all this other stuff interface with the blockchain, but they're not necessarily like on the blockchain itself per se. So we can look at these as dApps, DEXs, NFTs, all that type of stuff. These are all essentially kind of built around the functionality of smart contracts. That's what we're going to be looking at next. NFTs are essentially digital assets that represent internet collectibles. You could think about essentially like fractionalizing or like making ownership of digital goods is essentially what we're thinking. So think about intangibles, art, music, games, I don't know, pictures, whatever, things like that. So essentially all it is an authentic certificate created and stored, again, on the blockchain is not necessarily the case. It's stored kind of on like an AWS server somewhere, but it interfaces with the blockchain, and that's kind of how people know like what it is. There are inscriptions. This is primarily on Bitcoin. Ethereum started doing it a little bit, but there are inscriptions, and these inscriptions are actually stored on the blockchain. But NFTs generally, again, they interface with the blockchain, but they are not necessarily directly stored. Now, these NFTs cannot be forged or otherwise manipulated because their transaction record is actually stored on the blockchain, so people can know when an NFT is legit or not. Now, assets can be exchanged or sold between users via NFT marketplaces. This is fairly common at this point. Think about like OpenSea or Blur or Rarible or Magic Eden. I mean, there's a whole ton of them. This kind of really took off at the end of last cycle. We haven't really seen NFTs come back yet. They're starting to make some moves, but I think it still kind of remains to be seen if we will see NFTs really kind of make a full resurgence back in this cycle. But essentially their main use is for the partitioning, record keeping, and distribution of the virtual world. This is really kind of what makes them valuable, is because you now can sort of assign ownership and value to the internet, which you kind of sort of could, but not really before. The only way you could before was in a highly centralized manner. This kind of allows us from like more of a decentralized type of perspective. Now, the validation and authentication of various real world products can also be done via the blockchain, via NFTs as well. So there's a lot of different like potential use cases that we could be seeing with NFTs. I think NFTs is like the PFPs and like all the type of like speculation and whatnot that we've seen recently. The days of that are, maybe they'll come back a little bit, but I think there are a ton of really practical uses that we could see out of NFTs coming up in, maybe this cycle or the next cycle, but there's a lot of things that I think really have solid, useful applications here. So, and this is essentially kind of what we're getting at, right? I mean, they've got the potential to basically fundamentally reimagine. Gaming is a huge one. There's a ton of people massively bullish on crypto gaming, and I think it's mostly in part due to NFTs, because NFTs allow you to essentially own the stuff that you're collecting, which previously has not really been the case. So that's kind of a quick breakdown of kind of what cryptocurrency is, how it works, some of the basics around there. If you are somewhat familiar with the crypto industry, some of this was maybe new to you, but a lot of this is probably relatively basic. I do think it is nice though to have kind of a refresher now and again to just kind of learn the nuts and bolts of what we're truly talking about. But ultimately, this video was primarily intended for if you have friends or family or whoever that might be crypto curious, that this could be a way that you could kind of point them in that direction. So anyway, I'd love to hear your comments, what you think about these types of videos. Should I do more? Are they useful? Are they not really useful? I would love to kind of get your guys' feedback on what you think about them. If you have anything that like maybe I should cover in more detail, or if there's other parts of the crypto space that maybe you want to learn more about, things like that, I would love to hear kind of all of that. So just feel free to put that in the comment section below. Also, a like and subscribe really does help, especially if you're looking, like if you're new and you are looking for kind of more consistent updates within crypto, learning more about the crypto space. I would say this would be a great place to do that. So anyway, thank you guys for tuning in. We'll see you in the next video.